friends. Welcome to episode 9 of School Librarians United. I am your host, Amy Herman. This podcast is dedicated to the issues and challenges school librarians face every day. As a school librarian for now 12 years, I found myself asking the question, where is the podcast that'll help me do my job? I wanted a podcast which addressed the nuts and bolts of running a successful library program. I don't claim to have the answers, but I hope that this is a platform to share resources and exchange ideas. So whether you are a novice or a veteran school librarian, this podcast has something for you. Before we dive into today's topic, I'd like to address something which caught my eye on Tuesday. The Business Day section of the New York Times is one which I do not regularly study. Until this week, I'd resort to reading the business section of the New York Times when my wait at the ophthalmologist ran long. This week, however, I kept the copy with me until I'd have a chance to include it in today's recording. What caught my eye was an oddly shaped cover of John Green's The Fault in Our Stars. I've included a link to the article in today's show notes. This discovery launched a lovely distraction from the dreary midterm election coverage and gave me the perfect excuse to go down that internet rabbit hole. It is also why I found myself using Google Translate to understand a website of not one but 2 public libraries in Belgium, and I still hold out hope that my email to Dear Librarian will be answered. This article introduced readers to something which isn't at all new in the Netherlands. Launched in 2009, the Dwarsliggers is also referred to as a flipback book, and it is a full-length book which is the size of a cell phone and flips horizontally. The translation can be to lie crossways, and it also means someone or something that stands out or is different. A Google image search revealed a library display of these Dwarsliggers laid out on a table, and it looks somewhat like tape cassettes lying on a trade show table. It gave me the idea to email a Belgian librarian and inquire as if these books were lost at the same rate their traditional-sized counterparts were. Clearly, they were separated, displayed according to format, and not interspersed with their regular books. The pages are described as somewhat wafer-thin or onion skin, or even similar to the papers one would roll a cigarette. I imagine, without handling one personally, that the pages might feel similar to those in a phone book or an encyclopedia, a dictionary, or a Bible. So is this the next craze to consume American readers, is what the article posits. I've encountered pocket-sized books when shopping for my children, not for my library necessarily. DK pocket books and mini joke books are perfect for long flights or sending in a care package, as I did for a student of mine who was hospitalized. Mini books, such as the Beatrix Potter books and Maurice Sendak's Alligators All Around, Chicken Soup with Rice, One Was Johnny, and Pierre, which Amazon touts as, quote, the pint-sized library perfect for small hands, end quote, does not, alas, lend itself to shelving in a school library. Miniature books, as well as oversized coffee table tomes, are a challenge to shelve with the collection and creates a sort of Goldilocks, not too small, not too big, but just right scenario with our book purchases. This is a topic which will be addressed in an upcoming episode on purchasing mistakes I've made, as well as another one on collection issues. At the risk of sounding negative, because this is format-driven, I'm inclined to say that readers might like to handle one of these books before investing in one. Given that our 2 neighborhood bookstores closed up years ago, readers might be willing to take a gamble and order one online, and a quick search of flipback books using Amazon produced inconclusive results. As a former history teacher, I am intrigued at the concept of books in miniature, and it's not a new one. But introducing them in this day and age is a gamble. Even author John Green, whose popular fiction will test American interest in an initial printing of 500,000 flipback books this holiday season, said, quote, I have no idea how people will respond to this. They're objects that you almost can't get until you're touching them, end quote. I interpret this as, you don't know until you have one in your hand, that one truly understands the following of this format already has in the Netherlands. If you listened to episode number 8, Live Your Best Library, you know that I attended our convention for school librarians for the state of Michigan last week. I wanted to take this opportunity to highlight one session which I thoroughly enjoyed. Mary Kelly and Holly Hibner, aka the Awful Library Book Ladies, came to both entertain us and also inform us about the importance of weeding. I'll include a link to their website in the show notes. I highly recommend you explore their website and consider inviting them to your professional development or conference. First and foremost, they emphasize that collection management implies control. Collection development implies growth. The importance of having an updated collection development policy is one which cannot be overlooked. They also said that a good library is like a good haircut. It's not what you cut, it's what you leave behind. And that really stuck with me for a long time. Libraries are not in the business of collecting things, like a museum. Rather, a library is in the business of providing content and access to content. Mary and Holly suggested weeding by first removing unnecessary duplicates, by assessing the condition of your collection, removing books that were just no longer relevant. They use the word stupid, a word that we can't use in the elementary schools, and also by using reports, a shelf list by publication date, by call number, and also by assessing a different benchmark for each section of your library. For example, the science section of your library collection would have a different benchmark for copyright date than, say, your fiction. Mary and Holly also emphasized that you cannot weed based on circulation statistics alone, and that there are always exceptions. I did like this particular piece of advice, that awards do not make books sacred. I do have an upcoming episode dedicated to the sacred cows on the bookshelf and the books that always seem to survive a thorough weeding. Our regional differences also have to be considered. For example, I imagine Michigan school libraries have far more biographies on Henry Ford, Rosa Parks, and Aretha Franklin than might be found in other states. Paperbacks and the cost of having to tape them up and repair them oftentimes takes more staff time and cost than it does to simply replace them. Putting things on a watch list reminded me of like a trip to the dentist when one is watching for cavities. But Mary and Holly suggested that there are certain areas of your collection you should watch. It was nice to hear that magazines aren't worth inventorying, and that, as with the public library, school librarians also need to consider educating non-library people, particularly educators and administrators, about the importance of weeding. Something which hadn't occurred to me until I saw this presentation was that if your shelves are completely full, non-library people will assume that you don't need additional funding because clearly you have all the books you need. We were also reminded that books aren't permanent, so we should go slow so as not to draw attention when books are being weeded, that we don't use the word weeding, but rather have phrases such as updating our collection and other euphemisms which might not turn people off from the process, such as making space for the new books. You can't fix your collection in a year, so don't even try. Staggering this process over the course of a year is important. Doing a daily walk of your shelves and pulling an armful rather than a cartful of books won't attract attention and is always a good way to approach your weeding. And also to remember that it is not our mission to hold on to historical materials that might be archived. And also that weeding isn't optional. This is something which must happen in order for our collection to grow. It is interesting because on the one hand, you may say to yourself, doesn't this seem obvious? But as somebody who has spent a lot of time walking through other people's libraries, it's not obvious. I think that weeding is something that isn't fun, and it oftentimes gets pushed onto the back burner for more immediate needs such as lesson plans and more fun activities like purchasing books. I do want to say that when one is attending a conference, it's easy to get wrapped up in the excitement of all the sessions related to buying new books and the sessions on coding and the sessions on all the types of fun technology that you can include in your library program. However, something as fundamental as weeding really does need to be highlighted, and I appreciated this presentation very much. And now, join me today as we tackle the issue of got assistance? Consider yourself lucky. 12 years ago, and having landed my very first job as an elementary library media specialist, that's what we are called in Michigan, that's our job title, I was informed that I would be a solo librarian. I would work by myself with no assistant. Being a rookie, I hadn't a clue of just how much I didn't know about how to run any type of school library. It was my first year, it was a blur, and I wasted a great deal of time spinning my wheels trying to answer my own questions rather than breaking down and emailing my fellow librarians in the district in the other libraries. I didn't want any of them to know I was floundering. Truly a trial by fire. I didn't know where the staff lounge was for the first month of school because I was so busy keeping up a grueling 7 35-minute class visits per day. I was shell-shocked, and I often lamented about what could be possible if I just had some help. Year 2 was incrementally better. I had made connections with parents and students, all of whom had expressed an interest in assisting in my library. By my 7th and final year in this library, I had a rotation of 4 parents checking in 7 carts of book returns each morning and a crew of more than 50 student volunteers in grades 2nd grade all the way through 5th grade, and a dedicated team of 8 parents who ran my 2 book fairs each year. All of this took time and a willingness to foster relationships with adults and students who would come to love their school library. It had been made clear to me that when I was hired, this district would not be bringing in a library assistant. Consequently, I practically pounced on the parents who, while touring the school during back-to-school night or district open house, showed an interest in our library. Quote, "I've always loved the library. It must be so much fun to work here," quote, or something to that effect. Because my school had always had 2 Scholastic Book Fairs each year, I used Scholastic Book Fair dollars as my currency. My parent assistants received between $30 and $50 of Scholastic Book Fair vouchers to shop, depending on how often they volunteered. Similarly, my team of parent volunteers earned $5 in voucher money to spend for each shift they worked. I could count on lots of help, and my parent volunteers always left with armfuls of books for Christmas and birthday presents for their families. One important caveat when using parent volunteers is to conduct background checks. All schools require that parents pass a background check to volunteer in any capacity, be it driving on a field trip or assisting in the classrooms. It is essential that whenever a parent expresses an interest in volunteering, that I needed to also check with my main office. One year, I got lazy, and I allowed somebody to assist with the book fair who I found out actually had served jail time for writing fraudulent checks. Student volunteers are so much fun. It is possible that I violated some child labor laws given how many students worked for me each week. My student volunteer program evolved over the years. I always had attendance sheets. Students kept logs of when they worked and they earned prizes. These were items that I found at the dollar store mostly, candy bags at Halloween and Christmas, and candy-filled eggs before spring break. With the exception of the 2 Jehovah's Witness families, these gestures surprisingly never raised the ire of any parent. One year, I had lanyards made with library aid on them and a school logo on a round plastic keychain for all of my library assistants. I readily accepted early morning arrivals, as this was a free alternative to the before-school drop-off, which I found out could be expensive for families. I did invite the student who was always seen loitering outside the library door for almost an hour before the entry bell rang. There was a time where I also invited students to work during their lunch recess. Michigan winters can be brutal, and many of my students didn't bring snow pants or snow boots to school. My student volunteers, like many students their age, were extremely task-oriented. They took pride in possessing a skill which set them apart from their peers. They took ownership for areas of the collection they liked best. My tables were cleaned daily with antibacterial wipes, pencils sharpened, books returned to the shelves, and 600 book fair flyers were stapled and counted out for each class twice a year. Students rotated who ran checkout for their classes, and I even had several students who scanned books each year during inventory. I did considerable prep work to make this happen. I arrived early each morning and sorted out books on the risers, piles of dinosaur books, cat books, dog books, how to draw. My nonfiction shelf signs were also parameters. For example, 636 to 636.5, so students could put these books on the empty end of the shelf, so they were at least in the ballpark. And then when I had time, I would go and shelve these books numerically. Students became experts at shelving series books and putting all the series in order. Were mistakes made because I relied on students in this way? Absolutely. I guarantee that many of my student volunteers, however, were more attentive than I was by the 7th checkout of the day. The trade-off was that I wasn't trapped behind the circulation desk during checkout. I was free to work with my students. My student volunteers knew the collection well, and sometimes I heard them assisting their friends when their class came for their visit and checkout. I had a room full of Energizer bunnies, and I was ready to collapse. Here is the important caveat when it comes to student volunteers: parent and teacher buy-in. Once my students expressed an interest in volunteering, they had to get signatures from both their parents and teachers, the stipulation being that the school responsibilities came first, and that any time their position as library aide could be revoked based on their behavior in class or missing school assignments. I've been incredibly fortunate to work with all sorts of assistants who weren't volunteers but rather employees for the school district. I have worked with assistants who've had more than 15 years of experience working in many of the district libraries compared to me walking into a library 5 years ago. My master's in library science and 7 years of experience working in a different district couldn't hold a candle to what my assistants knew about the collection, the building climate, the teachers' and administrators' expectations. They knew all the students and their checkout habits, and I was clueless. In addition, my assistants typically worked with 2 to 3 different librarians each year. This meant that my teaching and my classroom management, or lack thereof, would be compared to everybody else. You'd be an idiot not to recognize the expertise our assistants had over us. Furthermore, our assistants were oftentimes in our libraries more than we were. This meant that my staff would oftentimes see the assistant as the go-to person every day, rather than me. I learned to become very consistent about CCing my assistant on all my emails with my building staff, and the favor was returned. I referred to my assistant as Miss or Mrs. and never informally by their first name in front of the students. When the students are in the library, I referred to us as a team, one of us behind the circulation desk and one of us out by the books. I always spoke of my assistant as running the show and was sure to give what I considered to be thoughtful gifts at Christmas and at the end of the year. Sentences began with, "Mrs. So-and-so was kind enough to pull all the Halloween books on the cart for you to enjoy," or, "When Mrs. So-and-so and I shop for the library books, we..." And I never used the word assistant in any context. My assistant was the other adult in the room, a source of information, an extra set of eyes and hands, sometimes a fact checker, and in cases of emergencies such as a fire drill, the caboose to the line which I led down 49 steps to evacuate our building. My assistant is essential, and even more so when I'm absent. I'm convinced that substitute teachers will accept my job posting more readily because I typically have an assistant present in the library. Lastly, I am very sensitive to respect my assistant's opinions and routines as they have been fine-tuned over the years. I know to stay in my lane. I never presume that I can do my assistant's job because I never want to jeopardize either of our positions in the district. I would like to thank you today for listening. If you found this podcast helpful, please subscribe on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Share this podcast with other school librarians in your district and your PLN. Consider leaving a ratings on iTunes as it helps other school librarians find this podcast. I would like to thank composer Nazar Ryback at hooksounds.com for the music you've heard today. And as always, I invite your feedback and your contributions. Please email me at schoollibrariansunited@gmail.com. You can also find me on Twitter. Our next topic will be leveled books. I hope you will tune in.